I know that many of you were with us last week for Danielle Hartman's session. So I'm going to just be helping out behind the scenes. If you need anything during the session, you can send me a chat. And so will Ariel. So we are really honored that we get to learn with you throughout this month-long celebration of ideas. This is the second session of 4 sessions with Hartman faculty that we are doing exclusively with Temple Emmanuel, and it's really a credit to Amy Klein, who is our partner, is our partner in this, and really made sure that Temple Emmanuel had this special experience throughout this month. I do also want to share gratitude on behalf of the Institute to the Temple Emmanuel community for being a presenting sponsor for our All Together Now summer program, which we're so grateful for. And, you know, as of today, we have over 6,000 people registered from all over the world, I can say, from North America, from Israel, from other places, who are learning with us on a regular basis. And we are so appreciative of your support to make all of that learning free and available to the public. So now a few just logistical things before Elana speaks. First, if we can ask you to update your name on your Zoom display. Some of you, it may say like iPad or phone, or it may just have your first name. If you can click, there's 3 dots on the top right corner of your little Brady Bunch square that has your face in it. So if you click the 3 dots in the corner of your display square, you'll be able to rename yourself. So we would love to know your real name. You can put your first name and your last name. And this is a meeting, as you can tell, so we can see everyone. Everyone will be muted throughout the session, except for the midway through when Elana will take questions, and at the end. So if you would like to submit a question or raise your hand, you can do either. You can use the hand raise function, which you can see on the bottom right of your screen. So you may want to take a minute right now and just see if you see the button that says hand raise on the bottom right of your screen. And feel free to, if you can test it out, you can raise your hand now and lower your hand just to see if that works for you. If you can't locate that, that's fine. You can also send me a chat and let me know you have a question, and I'll be able to call on you that way as well. This session will be recorded, and the session recording will be available within a week. I do want to say that we had a bit of a delay in uploading some recordings from last week as we learn a new skill at Hartman and process hundreds of sessions. So the recording from Danielle's session from last week will actually be available at the end of this week. And you can find that on the session page. And of course, you can email me as well if you can't locate that, and I'll be happy to get that to you. If you haven't already, you can easily access the sources for this on the session page for this session, and I'll also send the link in the chat, and Elana will be showing the sources on the screen itself. Just note, if you've printed out the sources in advance, that Elana did some extra prep before this session and added an additional slide. So if you don't see one of those pages that she's showing, it's because she just added it recently. So I just wanted to flag that. So I think that's it. Thank you for listening, and we're so excited to learn together. It's my pleasure to welcome Elana Stein to teach us this morning.
Thank you so much, Jordana, and thank you, Ariel, for helping us out. Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Wes. This is so delightful, and I see so many faces that I know and so many faces that I don't, so this is going to be really, really fun. I hope that people, if you want to remember your question, put it in the chat or write it down, but what I'm going to try to do is I'm really going to try to take questions and comments too in the middle of this shiur and also at the end, because your insights and your questions actually help deepen the learning in a very real way. So I want to talk about the ethics of proximity. And what I mean by the ethics of proximity is essentially, like, who do we take care of? Who's closest to us? And do we take care of people who are closest to us? Do we take care of people who have the most urgent needs? Do we take care of people who are physically closest to us, or let's say family or friends or colleague closest to us in terms of relationship. And, if we were to talk about this a month ago, some of you may have been on the iEngage webinar with Lauren that I was on, or maybe listen to it later. If we would have talked about this a month ago, the topic of ethics of proximity really would have focused on the question of triage. And what I mean by that is each one of us, there's so many needs that are coming at us all the time in the corona pandemic. And the question of who goes first, or who gets our attention, or who gets what portion of our energy and our resources, I felt at that time, really, it just felt so urgent to think about that question, because I felt so overwhelmed. Am I supposed to be supporting my Jewish community? Am I supposed to be supporting the New York community? Am I supposed to be supporting doctors? Am I supposed to be supporting, people in third world countries where actually there's a possibility of starvation for 80 million people right now who actually can't get free of corona, and that eventually is going to come back to us anyway? I just felt very overwhelmed by that. But as time has gone on, and I'd imagine that your experience is a little bit different than mine, I'm sitting in New York. As time has gone on, I actually have started thinking more and more about the question of economics versus physical safety. And I want to frame that for us today as actually a question within the ethics of proximity, a question within us and them. And I'm going to explain why I say that, okay? First of all, the reason why I'm interested in it is simply because we're all going through our various phases. Is it phase 1 of the opening? Is it phase 2 of the opening? Is it phase 3 of the opening? And it's raising important questions implicitly and explicitly. It's raising important questions about what do we prioritize in this time? We're allowing businesses to open, but is it safe to go there? What does it mean that people are working? And how is that going to impact my health if I'm not working? I think there's actually a deep us and them question to be understood here, not to mention the fact that in the American landscape, in our discourse right now, the conversation about economics versus physical safety has actually been pitted as an us versus them. Like so many other things in our society, whether it's racial and social issues, whether it's political issues, what this has been framed as in our society is a group of people saying, we need our health and our physical safety, and another group of people saying, we need our economic safety. And really the two groups have emerged, like everything else, as groups in this country of us versus them. And what I'd like to do is I'd actually like to take out the verses in this shiur. And I'd like to think about this as us and them, and not as the static, those people who say that the economy needs to be open, and those people who say that health has to be paramount, but actually as an us and them, in the sense that we all are actually obligated to each other. And we need to think about what those obligations mean when different groups and different people are talking about their needs in opposing kinds of ways. So I want to reframe us from an us versus them to an us and them. Now, when we talk about anything in Jewish ethics, there's a big question. What does Judaism have to say about ethics that hasn't already been said? Is there anything unique about a Jewish approach to ethics that is different than something you would get in a college classroom if you learned great Western philosophers in Ephesus, or if you learned great Eastern philosophers in Ephesus? Now, what I can say is that I'd like to spend the first half of this conversation framing what I think is actually a Jewish conception of the ethical question right now. Do I know if there are other ethical traditions that may have a similar conception? I'm sure there are. But what I want to lay out is not just, here are some Hebrew terms that go with the ethical conceptions that you already have. What I want to lay out is if you actually look into Jewish thought And I usually focus on the rabbis for that. If you look into Jewish thought, what will you see as far as the big framing of the ethical question of economics versus physical safety? And what you will not see, I can tell you right now, is you will not see a cost-benefit analysis. Judaism is not into a cost-benefit analysis when it comes to human life and economics. And so the issue is not going to be posed as money versus life. I want to spend the next little while talking about how the issue is framed in Jewish sources. And after that, we're going to take questions. And then we're going to look at one source, literally one source that I think really is the text that deals with the question that we have right now about economics and physical safety, okay? So the first framing that I want to give from Jewish sources and Jewish ideas is that as opposed to our American conversation, which is so rights-oriented, I have the right to go to work. I have the right to my physical safety. Judaism is obligations-oriented. It is duties-oriented. We know this from the 10 Commandments themselves. The 10 Commandments do not say, you have a right to life. The 10 Commandments say you have an obligation not to murder. The 10 Commandments do not say you have a right to get a fair hearing in court. The 10 Commandments say you have an obligation not to lie under oath in court. The obligation approach does many things. First and foremost, the obligation approach essentially says, you know, if you think about things through a rights lens, just because I have the right to something doesn't mean somebody else has the duty or the obligation to give it to me. And in Judaism, instead of talking about what I have the right to, and then hoping that there's somebody out there who's going to help me get it, Judaism talks to each of us as an actor and says, you are responsible to act out certain obligations to give people what they need and what they deserve. And so it's a kind of network that is automatically making us responsible for each other. And in making us responsible for each other, what it does is it essentially suggests that we're all in the same boat together. The idea of us versus them, of these are my rights, I don't care what your rights are, and I'm not thinking about your obligations, I'm simply, my rights are what rule the day. That actually divides communities as opposed to bringing them together. Don't get me wrong, I understand the importance of talking about rights, human, civil, etc., but the impact of speaking in a rights-centered discourse is actually to divide people from each other. Whereas the impact of speaking in an obligation-centered discourse assumes that John and Dixie, for example, you are by definition not on your own. You are responsible to somebody else from the very beginning. You can never think of yourselves as being in a vacuum. And I want to start with two texts that I think really dramatize this well. This notion of being obligated to the other as a primal idea in Jewish ethics. I'm going to share my screen. And remember, if you have questions, hold on to them. We are going to get to all of them, or we're not going to get to all of them, but we're going to get to as many of them as we can, okay? But I'm going to share my screen with you. And I want to look at this first text. I think that this text in many ways typifies what it means to think of ourselves as obligated rather than thinking about our own rights. This is a text from Vayikra Rabbah, or Leviticus Rabbah, which is sometime, it's created in the land of Israel, at that time Palestine, and it's created between the 3rd and the 5th centuries, and it's a rabbinic text. And it says the following: Chizkiyahu taught, and this is the name of a rabbi, not the name of the prophet Chizkiah. It is said, Israel is as scattered sheep. Why are Israel likened to sheep? Just as with a lamb, when it is hurt on the head or on any other limb, all its limbs feel it, even so it is with Israel. If only one of them sins, all of them feel it. So the first part of this midrash is essentially trying to tell us what we already know from our experiences as part of the Jewish people, which is when one group of the Jewish people does something wrong, other groups get blamed for it. This is speaking in a more metaphysical way than in the sense of, the news will say all Jews are responsible, or people who see you in your office may ask you, hey, what exactly is going on in Israel right now? Can you explain that to me? Right? But this is more metaphysical of when a Jew sins, all are punished. But the idea is to actually think of ourselves as one body. Now that's interesting by itself, but I think the next metaphor that's offered is actually the metaphor for right now. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai taught, this may be compared to the case of people on a ship, one of whom took a borer, a tool that can create a hole, and began boring beneath their own place on the ship. The fellow travelers said to that person, what are you doing? And the person who was busy making a hole in the ship said, what does it matter to you? I'm just making a hole under my own spot. And they said, what do you mean? The water is going to come up and flood the ship for us all. In this example, we're not talking about people doing, a sin. What we're talking about is we literally take down our own ship when we think of ourselves as only boring a hole beneath our boat. That to me is something that we have learned in Corona in such a deep way. We have learned that whether we live in Asia or we live in Alaska or we live in South America, we literally are all in the same boat, so much so that a virus traveling from any of those places can ultimately impact all of us. We are also learning with the arguments over masks and social distancing that if people are not willing to keep their social distancing, they're going to impact other people. We are actually in the same boat. I would like to offer that the idea of obligation as a framing question for economics versus physical safety puts us all in the same boat. So the people who are pushing for economic reopening, they're often saying, look, I need my rights. I need to be able to make a hole where I'm standing in my boat. And we're saying to them, but we're in your boat too. And we're going to drown too if you create a spread of this virus through business. But they're also saying to us, you think you're protecting yourself and all you're doing is giving up on your own economic decision-making in this moment to prioritize your safety. But really, you're making a hole in the boat for all of us. And we small business owners, we actually are in big trouble. You're going to sink the boat for us. And I want that to be the way that we think about this. Because I know that when I get up in the morning and I ask myself, to whom am I obligated? Often what I think about is me, myself, and I, and my little group. I don't always think about the full boat, and I don't always think about the full system. And included in the full system have to be, like it or not, have to be the people who are saying their boats are overflowing because they can't open their businesses. That too matters. So that sense of obligation. I want to say one more piece about that sense of obligation. That sense of obligation also speaks to us significantly about how we are ultimately going to be impacted by how the other is impacted. It's not just that we're in the same boat, that what we do has an impact on somebody else, but that impact will come back to get us. And for that, I want to look at a contemporary conversation in ethics that is not in Jewish ethics, but I think it illuminates how the idea of obligation and more of an ethic of care actually can be really important in reframing this discussion. I'm going to share my screen again. I'm getting a little better at this, but Not sure. And you notice what you have here is just a link. We're going to go to that actual place on the internet, okay? What we see here is a conversation, a description in the Washington Post about a moral dilemma. What they're going to talk about here is a really important conversation that happens mid-20th century between two ethicists, Lawrence Kohlberg and Carol Gilligan, about what it means to be ethically sophisticated, okay? To get an idea of your own moral stance, consider this problem posed to adolescent boys by Harvard University professor Lawrence Kohlberg. In Europe, a woman was near death from a very bad disease. There was one drug that the doctors thought might save her, a form of radium that a druggist in the same town had recently discovered. The drug was expensive to make, but the druggist was charging 10 times what the drug cost him to make. He paid $200 for radium and charged $2,000 for a small dose of the drug. The sick woman's husband, Hain, went to everyone he knew to borrow the money, but he could get together only about $1,000, which was half of what it cost. He told the druggist that his wife was dying and asked him to sell it cheaper or let him pay later. But the druggist said, "No, I discovered the drug and I'm going to make money from it." Hain got desperate and broke into the man's store to steal the drug for his wife. Was it morally right or wrong to have done that? Why or why not? I'm going to pause my share for a minute. I would like to take a raise of hands. Was it morally right for Hain to steal the drug? If you can raise your hand by clicking on the reaction button on the bottom of your screen, which gives you an option of clapping or putting a thumbs up. If you think Hain was right to steal the drug, please put a thumbs up or a clapping on your video. I've got 1, I've got 2, I've got 3, I've got 4, I've got 5. The reaction button is on the bottom of your screen. I've got 6. I've got 7. I've got 8. All right, we're getting there. We're getting there. Wow, wow, wow. Okay, now, if you could put your hands down or your thumbs down or your claps down, if you think that Hain was wrong to steal the drug, please put your hand thumb up or clap or something. Oh my gosh, I love this. Okay, we've got 2, we've got 3, we've got 4, 5, 6. Oh, wow, this is pretty even. This is pretty even. Oh, I like this. This is pretty even. So let's take a look at how it works out, okay? Well, by the way, every part of me just wants you to talk out loud and tell me why you think what you think. But for the good of the Zoom, we're going to continue, okay? Look at what happens. And this is really an argument, a machloket, between Lawrence Kohlberg and Carol Gilligan. Here goes. When psychologist Carol Gilligan presented the Hain dilemma to both boys and girls. Now, this is going to be very gendered, and I don't think it has to be. So I just want to make that very clear, okay? She determined that the answers from a boy, Jake, and a girl, Amy, show that these two children see 2 very different moral problems. Jake views it as a problem of rights, she says, a perspective more common to men, I don't know if that's true, and traditionally considered more mature. That was the case. Lawrence Kohlberg was pushing for that in the mid-20th century. Amy sees it as a problem of responsibility, a view more common to women, again, I don't know if that's true, and traditionally considered immature, which is what Lawrence Kohlberg thought. Let's find out why they say yes and why they say no. Jake at 11 is clear from the outset that Hain should steal the drug, notes Gilligan. Constructing the dilemma, as Kohlberg did, as a conflict between the values of property and life, he discerns the logical priority of life and uses that logic to justify his choice. For one thing, a human life is worth more than money. And if the druggist only makes $1,000, he's still going to live. But if Heinz doesn't steal the drug, his wife is going to die. It's very clear, black and white. Amy, also 11, I mean, these 11-year-olds, they're pretty smart. Amy, also 11, sees the dilemma not as a math problem with humans, but as a narrative of relationships that extends over time. She considers the dilemma to arise not from the druggist's assertions of rights, but from his failure of response. I don't think Heinz should steal the drug. If he stole the drug, he might save his wife then. But if he did, he might have to go to jail. And then his wife might get sicker again. And he couldn't get more of the drug, and it might not be good. So they should really just talk it out and find some other way to make the money. Okay? I love this argument. I love this machloket, because I think what it shows you is that when you are, in a sense, thinking about things as we're not all in the same boat, it's very easy to say, I'm going to steal the drug because life is more important than anything else. But what Amy taught us, that 11-year-old Amy, and what Carol Gilligan tried to push is what we're not thinking about is short-term versus long-term. In the long term, our decision to assert our rights may actually end up hurting us in the long term. And instead, what we need to do is we need to discuss and try to figure out if we can come to some agreement. Better to be able to come to some agreement than not. And so literally my first framing, to make it super duper clear, because I know that on Zoom it's not so easy. My first framing is a Jewish frame is obligations instead of rights. And what that does is three things. Number one, it focuses on people actually doing something to help the other, rather than just what someone deserves, but having to do something. Number two, it puts us all in the same boat and makes us recognize that there's no such thing as I'm only impacting my side of the scale, I'm not impacting you. I'm definitely impacting you, and that has to be part of it. Have to think of ourselves as in a whole boat. And number three, if really what we're talking about is mutual obligation, then ultimately whatever it is that I do that impacts you is going to come back and impact me in some way. And if that's the case, better that we work together than view ourselves in opposition. That's the first frame. The second frame, and then I'm going to take questions. I know that it's a lot, but I want it to be a lot, right? The second frame that I think is really significant for us to understand in Judaism is the reason why you're not going to hear a cost-benefit analysis in Judaism about, well, how much are we going to lose if we close the economy versus how much are we going to lose if we open the economy but we lose people. You're not going to hear that kind of analysis, because actually Judaism does not view this as a money versus life conversation at all, because Judaism is stuck between two pictures. And when I say Judaism, I mean biblical and rabbinic tradition. Biblical and rabbinic tradition is stuck between the following two pictures, not life versus money. Those are not the two pictures, but actually the invaluable, the priceless nature of life on the one hand, and my obligation to myself on the other. What that means is what we're going to see in Judaism is not going to be how much are we going to lose as a society, but it's going to be the value of human life versus the value of my own living. And I want to show you a slide that is going to help us dramatize that, okay? I'm going to share my screen again. Back and forth. Back to our slide. This is the slide that I added. You do not have it. So if you're looking at the sources, look up at this for this one, okay? Human life or my life is the way that we understand this, okay? Now, human life is on the left side of the screen. It's very simple. The Torah tells us in Leviticus 19, Lo telech rachil be'amecha, don't be a talebearer among your people. Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa, don't stand idly by or literally on the blood of your neighbor. Ani Adonai, I am the Lord. Now, this clause of do not stand by the blood of your neighbor is the clause in Jewish thought that gives us the importance of human life. It does not say you cannot kill your neighbor. We know that. It does not say even that you can't, hire somebody else to kill your neighbor. We know that. What it says is you cannot stand by when someone else's life is in danger. Now, that requirement is not qualified at all in the Torah. It does not say, well, if it's too expensive to save your neighbor, then you don't have to save them. It does not say if you're a bad swimmer, you don't have to call somebody else to help someone who's drowned, right? There are no qualifications here. And in fact, if you look in the Gemara, if you look in the Talmud, the rabbis in the Tractate of Sanhedrin, page 73, I believe it's A, talk about the fact that in Judaism, you have to spend money to save a human life. And commentators now, 20th century decisors, no less than a great scholar of the 20th century named Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, he essentially says you have to spend any amount of money to save a life. Any amount, even if it bankrupts you. Not 10%, not 20%, not whatever percentage you are of the number of people who know that there's a danger. You have to spend all your money to save a life. Now, can you run a society like this? That's a great question, right? But the idea of the primacy of a human life is an idea in Judaism that has no monetary equivalent. There is no monetary value. So what you would think is, great, case is closed, right? Case is closed. If you have to spend any amount of money in order to save a human life, because human life is so valuable, then of course we should be bankrupting our economy. People are just going to have to lose money, and that's it, right? Because we have to save lives. Now, I'm going to poke two quick holes in that, right? One little hole is the question of the percentage of lethal cases of corona, right? Like, is it certain that you're going to lose life in this situation? And the second is, can you actually have something like this on a societal level and still survive as a society, right? But that's not Judaism's worry right now. The other side of the coin is not that question of can we have a society or can we not? That other side of the coin is what is my life worth, okay? What is my life worth? Not all of human life, but my life. And let's look at it for a moment. The right side. This is a text that may be very familiar to many of you. It's the text of two people walking in the desert, and one of them has a flask, and there's only enough in the flask for one of them to live. And we have here in the Babylonian Talmud, it was taught in a Braita, an early rabbinic source. Consider a scenario in which two people are traveling on the road, and really they're probably in a place where they can't get to more water. Only one of them has a bottle of water. If both of them drink, they will die. But if one of them drinks, they will make it to civilization. That person will make it to civilization. The son of Petire expounded, it's better that they both drink and die so that neither of them will see the death of their fellow, right? Better to let one person live It's better to have them both die than one person do the terrible thing of essentially putting themselves first, right? There's what kind of people do we want to be? Do we want to be the kind of people that drink the flask that makes somebody else die? That was the law until Rabbi Akiva came and taught, your brother's life is with you, from Leviticus 25. Your life takes precedence over the life of your fellow. This side of the equation says, wait a second, we know that human life is sacrosanct. We know that you can't put a price tag on it. We know. But there's another side of the equation, which says that my life actually trumps somebody else's. Now take the case of economics versus physical safety. Put yourself in the mind frame of somebody who thinks that health trumps, that physical safety trumps. So you say, my life is more important than your life, people who have small businesses and can't keep them open. But now put yourself in the mindset of a person who has a small business and they have to go on food stamps and they have to get in line for their basic necessities because they don't have them. Can't that person also say, but my life trumps your life? Because, not because of my rights. I don't have more rights than you. I have an obligation to myself that supersedes an obligation to others. And so we're back where we started, us versus them, right? On the one hand, Judaism is so concerned with obligation. What am I obligated to do for the other person? And on the other hand, Judaism also has an ethic of being able to put oneself first. And how are those two going to come together in this moment? And I repeat, notice, neither of these we're talking about the value of a life versus the value of money. They were all talking about the value of life. It's just a question of whose life. And so I want that frame. I want to do one more thing before I open it to questions, okay? I want to take a poll. This is not fair, but I'm doing it anyway. I want to force you at this moment, if you choose to take the poll, obviously, to choose between prioritizing economics right now and prioritizing physical safety right now, okay? I know that it's not an absolute choice. You can do things to work on both. This is why it's not fair, but I wanna make you choose because first of all, I want us to see who's in our room. And I also want us to think about this as a question rather than just be presumptuous and assume what the answer is, okay? Ariel, can you please administer the poll to everybody? A poll should be coming up on your screen that says, what do you feel should be prioritized in society right now? Economic concerns or health concerns? Oh man, look at this, this is amazing. Okay, we've got 2 for economic. This is excellent. And if you want to play devil's advocate, you can play devil's advocate. This is everybody. We got 45 people. We have 96 people on this call. Nobody else wants to answer? I shouldn't have said the word forced, huh? Ariel, do you have? Okay, we've got 45, 48. Oh man, we've got 1 person who says economic concerns. This is incredible. You know who you guys are going to hate? You're going to really hate Rabbi Yossi in the text that we look at. You're going to really hate him. I just want to make you, I want to get you ready for that, okay? Wow. Okay, I'm happy to end the poll unless somebody else wants to vote. 49 people voted here. Okay, so 49 people voted. Of you, it seems, I'm going to share the results with you. Do you see the results? 48 of you said health concerns. One of you said economic concerns. Again, I really want to know from whoever said economic concerns, I really want to know your reasoning, because I think it would really, it would elucidate something for people. If you decide that you want to show yourself, let us know, but there's no pressure to do so. So to this point, what we see in this room, right, I think is twofold. Number one, we see if we were to think about the scales as the right to, the importance, the value of human life and the value of my life, what it looks like is, according to the poll, we're pushing down on the value of human life, right? But I'd like to suggest that we may also be pushing down on the value of my life. Meaning, we may be coming from the perspective that's asking, what do I need? What do I need to sacrifice for people for whom the economy closing is going to be, severe? And we may be answering, I'm prioritizing my life first. I want to just say that if I was in a room of small business owners, I'm willing to bet that the poll at most would be 50-50. I'm willing to bet. And I don't even know if that makes a difference if they're Republicans or if they're Democrats. I don't even know, right? So I want us to just think about what the poll in the room tells us about where we are on the scale, which I think is really significant. So now with that introduction, before we look at the text that's going to take us to the heart of this problem, the introduction of obligation rather than rights, the introduction of human life versus my life, as opposed to a question of cost-benefit analysis, I would love to take any comments or questions that are out there about this conversation.
So I've received a bunch.
Great.
I'm not sure. I think I know Wendy sent in a comment. I don't know if she wanted to share that. I thought it was an important one that I think some people may be thinking. Wendy, are you? Let's see. Please for a second. 1 second. I'm gonna look for you. Wendy, did you want to share your thinking that you sent by the chat, that you sent via chat?
Yes, as I have my Corona hair on.
Love it.
So
I'm taking a drink to soothe my throat.
Okay, so I thought the question was a privileged question because when we got back after lockdown from 6 months in Sydney, Australia, and so had to get food. We had nothing, and went to the market. And throughout this process, I've never felt really understood the privilege as, Bruce is going into the hospital or telemedicine, doing stuff, and going to the market, and there are people that have to work. And I think prioritizing economics, it's a conversation as a finance person I have all the time with people that, yes, we have to prioritize human life, but that doesn't mean eradicating the virus, because there are people that are going to have long-term economic consequences that this will take their life. This will take their livelihood and their ability to sustain themselves. And so we have to think about opening the economy, which is not a popular view. But
so to put this in terms of the framing that we gave, what you're essentially saying is, I want to inhabit the mindset of somebody who says, my life versus your life means we need to open the economy because my life is threatened by not opening the economy. Right? Is
absolutely.
Is that fair?
Like that. Absolutely.
Meaning you come down, and it's not saying anything about the value of human life being less. It's actually just saying I'm allowed to prioritize my life, my needs for my life over the dangers that it puts you in. Is that fair? Now, of course, you can try to split the difference and you can try to figure out a way that it's got, but there's no question, everybody, that if everybody stayed home, we'd be safer physically than if any business is open. I mean, there's no question. But
if everyone stayed, but if you take that to the nth degree and everybody stayed home, we can all start growing things in our garden if it's summer and eat. we wouldn't
there's what to say, but I think the point is what you just basically said is, wait a minute, what about the people who say my life over your life is actually about economics, right? That I'm just retranslating.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Other thoughts or comments or questions? And it's okay. You can be scandalized by this. You can be scandalized by this. There's not, meaning I'm not telling you my personal view. What I'm trying to do is I'm actually trying to frame what's going on in Jewish thought on this issue, because what we're about to see is actually trying to deal with that question of both obligation and my life versus their lives in a very real way, right? That's what we're about to see, and I wanted to prepare us for that. Yes, Wes. Uh-oh, Rabbi, you're muted.
Now I'm muted. Okay, I'm muted. Yeah. Could you talk about the my life versus human life in a somewhat different context, which is very real, which is Black Lives Matter versus Black anti-Semitism? Should I be worried about racial justice in America, or what about BDS? And that the people who want racial justice in America, and the most active, also say that we're doing genocide on the Palestinians, and if I support racial justice here, am I supporting BDS there? How do I disentangle that, my life versus their life?
So I think that's a great question, because there's, just like I poked a hole in the side of don't stand idly by your fellow, because I asked, wait a second, are we sure that this is a certain death kind of situation? And also, can this be done on the level of public policy? Let's go to the my life versus other lives side and see what holes we can poke there, right? The my life versus other lives is also talking about a situation where there's certain death on both sides, right? What happens if, actually what would happen to me is I would be thirsty, but I'd make it, but that other person wouldn't make it, right? It's clear that if that other person wouldn't make it, then I would have to give them the drink, right? The case is set up that it would have to be that both of us would die. But if only that person would die and I would be okay, then of course, right? So that's a similar hole to poke, is to ask what is actually the relative danger to each side. And that's exactly actually what's going to happen in the text that we're going to look at. It's going to ask, well, is it always my life versus other lives? Or what severity to my life are we talking about? Because the Gemara that's talking about two people walking on the way is, I'm going to die. I'm going to actually die. So I think when it comes to, questions of public policy, we have to ask that question. So when you're talking about Black Lives Matter and anti-Semitism, right? Again, you have the same question. What's the level of threat? What's the level of danger to Jews? And what's the level of danger or threat to people of color? And reasonable people can disagree about that, to be honest, right? And that's something that has to be the crux of the conversation of trying to figure out. But I do think that the my life and human life, having that tension forces you to have that conversation. Because if my life is just an absolute, you never think about the other side. And if human life is just an absolute, you never think about what it's doing to you, right? That's exactly what you're doing, is you're dramatizing, not surprisingly, you're helping us dramatize why having these two in tension is so important, because it forces you to ask the more nuanced questions rather than to just make black and white assumptions. And I want to see in the Jewish community, when it comes to Black Lives Matter, the fact that their platform says things about Israel committing genocide, the fact that there's plenty of anti-Semitism within the Black community, against the fact that there are people who are trying to build bridges between Jewish communities and even Zionist communities and people of color, and also the actual danger to Black lives, right, in America. So these are all, but that's a nuanced conversation to my mind, if it takes it both into account. Beautiful. So I just got from Jordana that we have Diane and Michael Gardner. Can you unmute yourselves and talk to us? I'm looking for you on the screen.
I just unmuted them.
Yeah, hi, I'm not, yeah, sure.
I'm trying to find you visibly. Oh, I see you, great. Michael, how you doing?
Yeah, I was just saying prior to Wes's point, I thought, I love Wendy, but I think it's something of a false choice because we can do what we're unwilling to do in America is what most of the civilized world is doing, and that is provide benefits to those who can't afford to work. So we just won't do that in this country for a whole host of probably historically related reasons and other reasons. But it's not a choice between having no employment versus those people who can work from home and support themselves, maybe pay somewhat more in taxes so we can provide payments to those who find themselves in a position where they otherwise would have to go in a dangerous situation. And that's how you take care of it.
See, what I love about what you're saying, Michael, is you're going back, again, to put it in terms of the framing that we said. The framing in America is about rights. We're a very us versus them kind of culture. Because we're based in capitalism, there is a sort of every person for themselves kind of ethos. And it definitely trickles into moments like this, right? There's no question that it trickles into moments like this. So one of the things that you're making very clear, I think, is that the framework of obligation rather than rights actually might make this less of a stark choice than the way it appears right now. And I think I just think it's worth thinking about, right? These are more nuanced questions. I want to also give voice. Somebody texted me privately, and I don't know if she wants to weigh in and say this as well, but she says by choosing health over economy, it's a choice of long-term benefits. As we see from Texas and Florida, focusing on the economy leads to the false security of the economy. They all had to retrench, right? What I think is great about that comment is that you could view it as the opposite. You could say, viewing economy as important right now is thinking about the long term, whereas focusing on the health benefits is the short term. But I think the comment that viewing the health things is actually also long term, because if you open the economy too quickly, you actually could have a really, right, we're all in the same boat, right? Meaning it gets back to the fact that it's ultimately going to impact all of us. And it's not an us versus them, but we're actually all going to be impacted ultimately by this, right? So I love that comment. That was from Anne. I so appreciate that. And I also just want to share that Michael Bonin pointed out something that I didn't mention, but people think that the Ben Patura approach of saying they should both die rather than somebody live and the other one die is actually a Christian approach, and that it's a reference to Peter and Jesus' apostles. Do we have any other questions or comments on this general?
Yeah, so I think Elizabeth and Anne's question were both just addressed. So we're going to go to, I don't know if Bruce and Susan Gold wanted to share their comments, and then Stanley K after.
Great, and then we're going to go to the text.
Sorry, I didn't realize what order. The point I made is that Susan and I voted for life, for health. But on the other hand, we would not be opposed to doubling the taxes, to which Jordana challenged and said, playing devil's advocate, what taxes would I even been talking about? I said, maybe to a certain extent, under the US system, we almost need more of a wealth tax, sort of like an estate tax while you're living. Because I think it's easy, you look and say 49-1 that we voted, but you look at the board here and the faces, and we're all older people who, one would expect at this point in time, hopefully somewhat more secure than the younger people would be economically, and aren't worried yet about food and housing and that sort of thing. So
yeah, no, that's beautiful. I think that's connected to what Michael said as well, which is, you're basically saying, let's break down what it means to prioritize health. What does that mean? I feel my obligation is to those who would need to prioritize economy, right? You're adding another level of obligation where you're essentially saying, I'm allowed to prioritize my life, but then I'm obligated to help someone else, right? Which I think is beautiful, because you've added, Bruce, and I assume Susan, by the way that you just nodded to each other, that this is coming from the two of you, that really you're adding another level You're adding another layer of obligation. And that layer of obligation comes from the understanding that we're in the same boat, right? Meaning that it comes from that basic understanding. So do we have one more, Jordana?
Yeah, there's one more from, I don't know if Stanley K wanted to share some of his thoughts. I just unmuted you.
I think Bruce basically said, you know, looking at this board, probably very few of us would come into the impoverished. If we can't work, we're going to starve. So he really said it.
Okay, beautiful. I like how the Temple Emmanuel community, that you all support each other, right? So walking into this text, let's remember that we're walking in with our tools, okay? The text that we're about to see. We're walking in with the tools of understanding that we're trying to come from the perspective of what am I obligated to do for someone else? And we're also walking in with the idea that Judaism has this tension between the value of human life in general and the value of my own life. Now, one thing that I think is difficult about this text, and I wish it wasn't limited in this way, is that this text is speaking from the perspective of the person who needs their economics, okay? It's not speaking from the perspective that Bruce and Susan or that Michael evinced, or that whoever spoke on Stanley K, I'm not sure who was speaking, right, mentioned, which is, I'm in the boat where I say, I have to prioritize my life, but I can help you with something else. So it's limited, and I want to recognize its limitation, okay? I'm going to share my screen. Okay. This is a Tosefta, and the Tosefta is just around the same time as the Mishnah. So it's like, you know, 200, 300 of the Common Era, okay? And the case is a case of limited resources. In the case of a cistern, so it's holding water, which belongs to the people of a town. If there is only enough water for the townspeople or for others, the townspeople take precedence in drinking the water over others. Now, that seems very similar to the Talmudic passage that we just saw, right? You have the flask of water, there's only enough for one of you to drink, so your life gets prioritized. Now, I want us to just think that the reason why in this Tosefta, in this passage, the reason why my life gets prioritized, is it because the cistern belongs to me, right? Like the resource belongs to me? Is it because, which by the way, would say, like, let's say there was somebody from out of town who owned a share in the cistern, right? So like, how do we define the me or the us, right? The people who own it, does our group take precedence because we are physically in proximity to the resource? And there's sort of like a, you know, first come, first serve kind of thing. And by the way, somebody from another town could sneak in, pretend they're, right, or move in and decide to live with us. Is it actually because we're loyal to our own? We have a community, right? So there's already, it's not totally clear what makes it, right? Like what makes it we get to drink from the water and the people in the next town who don't have, because there's a drought or something, don't get to, right? Is it loyalty out of a sense of community? Is it proximity because we're right there geographically? Is it because we own it? The Tosefta goes on. How about something a little more complicated? Let's say there's enough water to allow people in another town to drink and live, or to feed our townspeople's animals. Get it? I can either keep my animals alive in our town, or I can keep the people in the next town over alive, okay? Rabbi, the first answer is the lives of others take precedence over the animals. Of course, what are you kidding me? The value of all of human life. You're going to tell me that I am going to feed my animals and the people next door are going to die? Absolutely not. Impossible. Unless you're Rebbe Yossi. Get ready to be disturbed. Rebbe Yossi says that the townspeople's animals take precedence over the lives of others. Now, I would like you to just be scandalized by that for a minute. Just experience that scandal, and then I'm going to pull you back from the scandal, okay? What are animals in this agricultural economy? Right? So we're not talking about pets. We're not talking about like dogs and cats. We're talking about animals that pull plows. We're talking about animals whose skins you make things out of, whose meat you eat, right? We're actually talking about something akin to economics, right? Meaning at first it's sort of like, what? Are you kidding? Human life versus animal life? It's not about human life versus animal life. It's about human life versus human life. And what Rabbi Yossi is saying is, I can prioritize, as someone who needs to keep my economy going, I can prioritize my community's wealth, essentially. And we're not talking about luxurious wealth. We're talking about sustenance. How about sustenance? Let's say that. I can prioritize my community's sustenance over feeding another community. Now, the reason why this is so wild is because it's certain death for the other group. It's not like maybe they'll find water somewhere else, right? It's certain death. So this is pretty intense. So that's level 1, okay? Level 2. And by the way, before we get to level 2, if the animals of my townspeople or the animals of the other towns can get water, then obviously the animals of my townspeople take precedence over the animals of others. Fine, we got it, no problem, okay? Drinking water for the others or laundry for the townspeople. Yes, that's right. It's coming. What you feared is coming. Rabbi Yossi is going to say what he says about laundry. That's right. Okay, be ready. Water, drinking water for others, or the laundry for the townspeople. Of course, the first opinion says the lives of the others take precedence of the laundry. Are you a crazy person? How could you do? What do you mean? Give up your work. You don't need to do your laundry now. Rabbi Yossi says the laundry of the townspeople comes before the lives of the others. All right, you know what? I could buy it. I could buy it when it came to animals, because I can say, you know what? You need that to live. You need that to live. And going back to Ann's points about long-term, short-term, we could present this actually as like in the short term, you'd save people, but in the long term, you'd all be dead because you have no animals. And basically we would say my life over human lives, and I have to be able to do that. But laundry, laundry? So I want to share 3 approaches to laundry. And let me just tell you something, okay? On that poll, I would have said on the poll, physical health, okay? I just want you to know. I'm with the 48 of you on physical health. And I love what people added about being able to also give people money or pay double taxes or be willing to do something that's going to help people out. Beautiful. I'm with you. But I want to hear Rabbi Yossi because he's in the canon. So I want to hear him. Even if I don't like it, even if I disagree with it, I want to hear him, okay? So let's take a look. Now I have to figure out how to share my screen again. There we go, like in real time. So there have been a number of attempts to deal with Rabbi Yossi's approach. The first one comes in the Babylonian Talmud, okay? The Babylonian Talmud says, well, obviously, the discomfort of not laundering clothes must be worse than not bathing, according to Rabbi Yossi. As Shmuel taught, filth on the head leads to blindness, dirty clothes leads to dementia, not bathing leads to boils and sores. So let's just be very clear. What the Gemara is trying to do is it's trying to say, when Rabbi Yossi says you can do your laundry, it's because he's worried that you're going to get dementia. It's not laundry. Don't think of it as laundry. Think of it as health and safety and my life versus your life, right? That's like the first answer. Second answer, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, he says, instead of saying, well, my life, according to Rabbi Yossi, is more in danger if I don't do my laundry, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein does the other side. He says, maybe the other people's lives aren't actually in mortal danger here. The case is not of mortal danger. It can't be. It can't be. For Rabbi Yossi would not argue that their laundry takes priorities over people's lives when there's actual mortal danger. This can't be a case of mortal danger. It must be a case of excessive hardship, right? Both of these answers are scandalized by Rabbi Yossi, and they're trying to explain Rabbi Yossi. So one of them says it must be that not doing laundry is really dangerous to you, and the other one says it must be those other people are not really in danger. Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, known as the Netziv, he goes in a third direction. And it seems, he says, that the danger of thirst is different from the danger of animals or laundry. For where there is danger of thirst, they will surely die, which is not the case for animals and laundry. In that case, they may be endangered, but some people can travel without an animal and will not be afflicted. He doesn't look at the animal as economics, he looks at it as travel. And some will not come to dullness or dementia from a lack of laundering. Rather, at any rate, these situations of not having animals or not having laundry hold a status of possible mortal danger. And the first opinion holds that one must put themselves in possible mortal danger to save someone else from clear and present mortal danger. But Rabbi Yossi argues on this, that one should not, or maybe may not, put themselves in mortal danger to save someone else. One should not or may not put themselves in possible mortal danger to save someone else from clear and present mortal danger. Yet a third approach to try to minimize the scandal of Rabbi Yossi. To say Rabbi Yossi is talking about how much do you have to put yourself in potential danger to save someone else from clear and present danger. And so three approaches trying to deal with how intense Rabbi Yossi's statement is. I have a fourth approach that I find incredibly scandalous, but also true. How do we usually run our societies? We usually run our societies on the principle of our laundry over their lives. And I'll explain what I mean by this. When we have money as individuals, as a town, as a state, as a country, when there's spare cash, does it automatically go to saving lives? No. It goes to lots of things. It goes to infrastructure, it goes to the arts, it goes to education, it goes to luxury, right? We do this all the time. We always choose our lives or our laundry over other people's lives. Yes, of course, we give, and we take care. But ethically speaking, that is the way we live. Ethically speaking, we always choose our lives, our laundry over other people's lives. It's just true. Because if I didn't spend all of my money on saving other people's lives, right? Then if I spent all that money on saving people's lives, I couldn't buy myself a sofa, right? I couldn't send my kids to camp. I couldn't have this computer in front of me, right? My life over other lives is very expansive. Now, the question is, and the reason why it's scandalous, is because I don't know that I'd be comfortable saying that in a pandemic or if there was a drought. Meaning, it's one thing to say that when it's like, oh, you know, life is just hunky-dory and we have our proximate infrastructures and systems. right? Like my town has a budget and my country has a budget and other countries have budgets and other towns have budgets and there exist really good NGOs and they do their jobs. But in a pandemic moment, when there's a drought, everyone's looking at Rabbi Yossi like, really? Are you for real? Right? And so this last approach is making me wonder if you actually can really say my life over other lives as a public policy in a pandemic. Because as much as Judaism has a focus on my life over other lives, when the clear and present danger is so pervasive, I may have to, even as a business owner, I may have to say, I am obligated to give up for other people. And Rabbi Yossi is essentially saying, no, you do not have to say that, even though it's this clear and present pervasive danger. And so just to review us what we're trying to do here, what we're trying to do is reframe this conversation from people yelling, open the economy, and people yelling, keep it closed, to be a little bit more nuanced and understand what Jewish ideas would give to this moment. And it seems that this Tosefta, this source, is very much caught in the tension of human life or my life. And then once you get into that tension, the question of what does my life entail, and whether my life over human life is a sound public policy in a time of pandemic, I think gets us back to our original question. I want to take some questions or comments on any of this, and then I want to close up with some things to walk away with, okay? And it's okay if you are so bothered by Rabbi Yossi. So were most of the decisors. I mean, that's why people are trying to give explanations like, oh, he can't be talking about a case where somebody else is in danger for real, in a mortal way, or he must be talking about where not doing your laundry is actually dangerous for you, or maybe he's talking about the degree of risk that you have to take for somebody else, right? They're also bothered by Rabbi Yossi. So let's get some comments or some questions out here.
Haven't seen that many come in on chat. I know that Jerry and Ruth Jacobs had a comment a few minutes ago. So let's check in with them. Jerry, hi.
Yeah. Throughout this whole conversation, I've been a little disturbed because we assume that everybody is at the same level. So if you're comparing the life of two people, and if you have one person, and in a lot of these examples, if you have one person who's far more vulnerable and the other is not. I mean, for example, in our group, I think health was prioritized because generally as a group, we are far more economically kind of stable than a lot of others. We're home.
Yes.
Anyway,
absolutely.
I'd like your comment.
Absolutely. And what I would say is there's two ways that we're trying to address that in this conversation, right? One is to recognize that when we're saying health over economics, we're not just saying that from a place of lives are invaluable, but we're also saying that from a place of my life matters, right? It's personal. It's both human life is invaluable and also my life takes precedence over somebody else's, meaning I understand it's going to cause you economic hardship, but I'm in danger here, right? And what I wanted to point out is that if that's the framework where you have human life and my life, that there are some people for whom right now, those are in tension with each other rather than being on the same side. There are some people for whom right now, they say my life matters. And what I mean by my life is my economic safety, and it matters more than somebody else's health. I wanted to give voice to it, even if I myself fall on the other side, because I think it's an authentic argument from within the tradition. Now, the question is, what do you do with those? So I think we've seen two different models that have emerged in this conversation for what do you do about the fact that some people, when they say my life takes precedence, they're talking about economics. And some people, when they say my life takes precedence, they're talking about physical safety. So one model that's emerged is asking, so if we're in the camp of my life takes precedence, physical safety, what is our obligation towards those who are in the camp who say, my life takes precedence, I need my economic safety, right? That's one thing that's emerged from our conversation, to see that that's an authentic push and to ask, what's our obligation to help them? And that obligation doesn't have to come in the form of opening the economy. That obligation could come in the form of supporting small businesses by ordering deliveries. It could be making donations. It could be paying extra taxes, right? There are a lot of ways that can be done. But the point is, if it's so black and white that us versus them, rather than us and them, then we forget that just because our side of the argument says, hey, we're on the side of human life and my life takes precedence, doesn't mean I don't have an obligation to help those other people. And what is my obligation? How do I fulfill that obligation if I can't fulfill it by saying, open the economy, right? So I love that. I think the second piece of it is that I also want people who are focused on economy opening to be able to realize that what they're doing is they are putting their lives in tension with the value of human life. And they have to recognize that and not pretend that it's nothing, and not pretend, oh, well, it's not so dangerous, right? It's not so dangerous. And if that's the case, then even what people are calling for in terms of opening the economy, it has to be limited enough that we're talking about their lives and not their laundry, right? It has to limit to an extent that what people are allowed to do is keep themselves solvent, and not that they're making a profit right now, and not that they're doing extra things that are unnecessary right now, right? It means that they have to feel that tension as well and realize that there are people on the other side of the scale, and know that has to qualify the way they're choosing their own lives. Because I'm not a Rabbi Yossi person in the sense that my laundry should take precedence in a pandemic, but I do recognize that the ethos of my life taking precedence over somebody else's, it's real, but I still need to ask, what's my obligation? So in the desert case where we only have one thing of water, I know, short question, long answer. In the desert case where we only have one flask of water, there's very little I can do to show my obligation towards that other person. I'm going to drink, it's going to be zero sum. It's going to be a zero sum game. But what about where it's not a zero sum game? Yeah, if I'm saying, right, that's my entire point. And I'm so glad that you asked the question to bring it out. And that's what I was going to end with. My entire point is that this can't be a zero sum game. And seeing both sides should help qualify and help us realize that we have an obligation to the other side, and figure out what that obligation, how we can perform it, right? So I appreciate that. I think I saw Alan's.
Yeah, Alan, and then Audrey Audrey sent him by chat, and then we have the rest of the hand raises. So Elana, we have 6 minutes left. So
okay, so what do we want to do? Alan and Audrey?
Alan and Audrey, and then we can see if we have time. Yeah.
Okay, so here's I don't know what to do. What should I do?
Let's start with Alan and Audrey, and then if we have more time, we'll take the remainder of the questions.
Okay, fine. Alan and Audrey, because I want to end with something. Okay, Alan.
So like most people, I think on the call, I was shocked by Rabbi Yossi, but when you brought up the last source, it made me think a little deeper. And as you said, we would never be able to take a vacation or buy a not a necessity item if we live by the rules. But perhaps Rabbi Yossi is telling us that as in society, there's very few choices between certain death and for them or inconvenience for us. overall, the choices are really, I see it as other people are in possible mortal danger. Then how do you react to that? And it's possible that he's saying that he's raising up this issue that everybody around us, or many, many people around us outside of pandemics are in possible mortal danger. People, food insecurity and diseases in other countries and other things. And perhaps for the value of human life in general, we have to make sure that the possible mortal danger is raised up. He's bringing this in this context where it's only affecting me making the choice, but that reminds us all the time, should we take that vacation or give that tzedakah? And perhaps that is will save more human life, if we do that, even if in the particular case that we know some people will die, the principle is possible mortal danger is the thing that should always, you should always keep
I think that's very interesting. And I think that's exactly what the Netziv, who talks about possible mortal danger, is. I think that's exactly what he's trying to do. He's trying to raise that up as a possibility. Audrey, and then I'm going to close out. I wish we had more time. I apologize. And I would stay on the call, but I literally have to teach at 11:30. But please
share your email, Elana.
Email me. I would love to hear from you. We can get on the phone. Seriously, I think this is such scandalous stuff and really important. Okay, Audrey.
You have to unmute me.
You're unmuted. You're unmuted.
You're unmuted.
No, now she's muted again now.
How's that?
You're unmuted. You're good.
Okay, yes.
I guess my question is how we would think about the tensions that you've been describing if, rather than dealing with them, my sitting behind my computer and watching something on CNN that shows all the hungry people in New York, if in fact we were face to face with those hungry people, and it became a question of really not just seeing it remotely, but experiencing that kind of trade-off. And my bet is when all these things were written, all these conflicts that they were discussing, it was people who, you could see them, you could talk to them.
Yes.
And that's not true in our world.
Beautiful.
So it's a question.
There is a great book called Against Empathy. It is written by, I think his name is Paul Bloom. He's a professor at Yale. And what he writes about is how empathy is a dangerous way to make decisions, because you can only empathize with those who you know or you see or who are like you or something. There has to be something that tugs at your heartstrings rather than thinking in a more systematic way. And so on the one hand, it's, if we see each other, it gets us more invested in each other. And on the other hand, sometimes that investment can become a blind spot to other things, right? So I love that question. I want to end with this. What I basically tried to bring to you today is I tried to bring two framings from Jewish thought and Jewish ethics on this issue that I think may be distinct, or at least unique, if not distinct, if not unique. One, that we look at an obligation-centered model rather than a right-centered model. And two, that there is actually a tension between human life in general and that value as an ultimate value, and my life in particular taking precedence over somebody else's lives. Within that, what we saw is that using those frameworks, you actually can make an argument on either side for pushing more for the economics or pushing more for the health. If you're Rabbi Yossi, you may be pushing more in the direction of economics. If you're the anonymous first voice in the Tosefta, you may be pushing more towards health. But this entire thing, my goal in this entire thing was to break down the us versus them. That was my goal. Because if we can actually see the way that people's arguments matter and should matter and are part of a whole network, the way that Carol Gilligan is trying to push us, that we're actually part of a network that shares and there's action, reaction, and we impact each other, then regardless of whether you think it should be health first or economy first, you should feel a sense of obligation to the other side. And trying to figure out how to meet out that obligation, I think that's the hard work. Because that then brings up questions of what do I do with my resources? What do I do with my time? What do I do with my energy? And I know that people can be emboldened to basically say, oh, wow, this feels very black and white. It shouldn't be black and white. It has to get you back into the gray and trying to figure out where are the places where I'm prioritizing my life and where are the places where I'm feeling an obligation to somebody else's. So I hope this was food for thought and a little bit like pushed people a little bit, because that really, to me, that should be the goal of learning from Jewish ethics, is not just to reinforce what we already think, but to push us to think in certain frameworks, because I think that dialogue can be incredibly rich. And I hope you continue it amongst yourselves and with your rabbis. And thanks so much for the time and learning with you. And you're just delightful people.
Thank you, everyone. We will see you next Tuesday at 10 a.m. with Donnie Segal.
Thank you, Elana.
My pleasure. Thank you.